Noah's flood story is a complete fabrication, or at best a copy. And I'm going to explain to you in the next few minutes where the Israelites get their version of the flood story from, and then where all flood stories actually come from. So as far as the Israelites are concerned, their story of Noah and the flood comes from the fact of there was an older Mesopotamian story told by the Sumerians in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Enki knew that the flood was coming and wanted to save his son and wanted to save humans. So Enki tells his son Utnapishtim that a flood is coming. Enlil, who is later Yahweh, decides that he wants all the humans to die because the humans are too loud. So in this story, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim creates a boat and brings upon the boat the seed of every animal. And then the boat floats over this 6-day flood. And then after the 6-day flood, Utnapishtim is alive. But Enlil is pissed, but then he's okay with it because they need humans to start mining gold again. There's a lot more to the story, so go read it. Now, as this story makes its way into the Akkadians and the Assyrians and down into the Babylonians, the characters of the story change. All of a sudden, now the character is known as, Utnapishtim is now known as Atrahasis. And you can read this in the Atrahasis of how he pretty much did the same thing. There was a 6-day flood coming. He built a boat. He was told by the guys to build a boat. He builds a boat. And then the boat survives. He has the seed of every animal on the boat. And then humankind and animals and everything start over again. This was a popular version in Mesopotamia of that story. So the Israelites did not have this story in their canon until they were under Babylonian captivity. While under Babylonian captivity, they changed the name from Atrahasis to Noah. They changed the seed of every animal to every animal. Now there are problems with all these stories of flood. The problem is the fact that the story goes from a localized flood to a worldwide flood. When you look at it, a worldwide flood would be impossible. There's not enough water on the planet, underneath the planet, and in the air, in the atmosphere of the planet to be able to flood the earth, to cover the tallest mountain, which would still have been Everest at the time frame, and to cover it by 18 feet. And anything at that level would die of being frozen. It is an impossibility to carry enough food on this boat to even feed all the elephants and hippopotamuses and all the other large mammals that were on this boat, as well as the lions and the tigers and bears and all these other animals. And how did the two-toed sloth make his way all the way to Noah? Because according to this book, God brought every animal to Noah. Unless he magically poofed them there, there's absolutely no way they made it there. And with the different environments that these animals need to survive, there's an impossibility for this boat to have each environment for the polar bear and the lion and the elephant to be able to survive on this boat. Also, we're looking at all the waters of the world being mixed, and there's far more salt water on the planet than there is fresh water. So this would have increased the salinity of all the fresh water, so all the freshwater animals would have died. This would also dissipate the salinity that the saltwater creatures are usually in, and so all the saltwater creatures would have died, as well as all saltwater plants would have died as well. So therefore, there would be no life on the planet, and a whole bunch of dead fish animals, a bunch of dead sea animals floating all over the place, creating so much bacteria. Maybe that's why we got all these flies, but creating so much bacteria, and that it would have negatively impacted the planet to such a degree that life would not be sustainable on this planet. According to this Noah story, after the waters receded, and it took about a year to do so, you have a situation where the dove finally goes out and comes back and brings a branch of an olive tree. Well, there is absolutely no way, with all the salinity that would have occurred, that these olive trees would have been able to grow. The land would have been so salted all over the planet that an olive tree would not have the opportunity to grow. If you've ever driven by an area, and I see them all the time here in Wilmington, where the salt water has encroached itself onto where fresh water is, it's called tree deserts. And you see these trees that are just barren, and hundreds of them. That is how every tree on the planet would have been. There would be no life on those trees because the salt water for over a year would have killed every tree on the planet. Therefore, it is a virtual impossibility for this dove to have gone out and found this olive branch to let Noah know that it was okay to go back out into the world. Now to the repopulation of the earth. You got three childbearing parents. These three childbearing parents could not have produced enough people so that we have the number of people that we have on the planet today, nor could they have produced enough people in order to have the people that built the Tower of Babel. In my video I did a couple of days ago about the Tower of Babel, I briefly discussed the fact that these three couples could not have produced the 1,000 number of people that needed to be involved in building this tower. So therefore, they could not have. Also in that video, I discussed how the Minoan and the Mycenaean societies were around before, during, and after the flood. The Kemetic society was around before, during, and after the flood. What becomes the Chinese society was there before, during, after the flood. The Mesoamericans and the Americans were there before, during, after the flood. The Australians were there before, during, after the flood, as well as the people in the South Pacific, and people all over the world were there before, during, and after the flood, and they have no account of a worldwide flood happening at the same time. And that is where the claim that since over 200 cultures around the world have a flood story, then the Noah flood must be true. Why can't their stories be true? Why isn't the South Pacific story true? Why isn't some other group who had a flood story true? Why isn't the Southwest Asian story the true story? Oh, it's because you believe in your Bible. That's why your Bible story has to be the true story. It is all based on belief and your preference and bias. So why do 200 civilizations around the world have flood narratives? The main reason why this occurs is because all of those societies that have a flood narrative are either island-based or they are coastal regions. Interior regions do not have a flood story to the extent where it covered the world. To give you an example, the ancient Chinese flood story talks about how the Yellow River continued to flood, and it took them about 6 years and one person to kind of figure it out. And then when they did figure it out, their god, I forgot the goddess name, she affixed the heavens with giant tortoise legs and then hammered in these 6 colored rocks. And one of those rocks color was black, and there is no black in rainbows. And those 6 colored rocks closed up the hole in heaven so that water could not come out again and flood the Yellow River. But it was a localized flood and not a worldwide flood. I think her name is Nawu. So that flood story is more of a localized flood story. So any interior civilizations only have localized flood stories based on the flooding of rivers and not a worldwide flood, to which the coastal areas do. Well, why do they have that? They have that because in and around 12 to 9,000 years ago, after the Younger Dryas freeze, sea levels rose in a quick unfreezing, a quick warming by 400 feet. That 400 feet in sea level created floods that went into interior lands by hundreds of miles. And because it covered land hundreds of miles inland, people developed their different flood stories, whether it's the Peruvians who tell the story of how, and this is the Incas, of how they tribes or villages went to the highest mountain, and like 40, 50 people were saved because they went to this high mountain. Because if you ever look at the landscape of Peru, it's coastal, but it immediately goes into a mountainous terrain. So they were able to survive by climbing these mountains. In other areas where there was mountains, they climbed these mountains. In other areas where they did not have the same mountains, they got on boats. And they end this story, a boat, they have a boat as part of their story. So because of the Younger Dryas flood that happened around 12 to 9,000 years ago, 3,000 years later, we get the Epic of Gilgamesh with Utnapishtim. No society actually wrote about a flood during the time frame of the Younger Dryas flood. Every flood story is thousands of years older. But each one of those flood stories is basically the retelling of the Younger Dryas flood, which only affected coastal areas and areas that are a few hundred miles inland. So always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.